past decade, diversity, equity, and inclusion has grown into a major practice area and one of the hottest topics on business leaders' radars. Organisations raced to appoint DEI leaders in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in the US and the global Me Too movement, and they invested significantly in DEI resources and initiatives. Today, things are looking a little different. In this episode, we're going to be exploring whether DE&I has had its day, how DE&I functions and resources are evolving now, and what DE&I might look like in the future. Joining me to share her expert views is Audra Jenkins, Global Chief Equity Officer at Randstad, one of the world's leading talent companies. Celebrated as a 2024 Top 10 Global DEI Professional Icon, Audra spearheads Randstad's ED&I team across EMEA, North America, and Asia Pacific. She's a certified diversity executive, an active member of the World Economic Forum's DE&I community of practice, and she also hosts the Diversity Deep Dive podcast. Welcome to the business of being brilliant, Audra.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And does it feel interesting or different to be on the other side of the studio, the other side of the microphone?
You know what? I love the conversation. Anything that's going to bring highlight this topic, whether I'm on the other side of the microphone or behind the scenes, I love it. So thank you for the conversation at the time.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And just a quick shout out for your podcast. Who do you normally talk to on that? Who are your guests?
Yeah, we have guests from many of our largest clients, any sort of global companies. We've had Emmy award winners on there. Gabby Natale is a award winner, authors of books, different people, just
Mm.
whoever wants to talk about the topic and make a positive impact on the world.
Oh, fantastic. Sounds like your guests come from a real wide range of backgrounds and industries. And good. That's going to be definitely going on my to listen to list on the school runs in the mornings and afternoons. So great. So, well, let's dive into the topic that I was just introducing about what is going on around diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's seen huge growth and importance, quite rightly, on organizations' agendas, but it's also going through some quite significant change. And you obviously lead this agenda for a very big organization. Have you always worked in this field, or is it something you've come to from other roles?
Thank you for that question, Helen. So I started out working in finance and risk. I know it's a long, convoluted way to get there, but and that led me into benefits and led me into human resources, and then it became part of my job, working in HR, and then it led into a full-time opportunity. So excited to be here with you today, and hopefully I can give some nuggets of advice or to help this community of practice of DE&I work professionals.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm sure you hear and probably benefit from in some ways yourself as well. You know, the conversations that you have at places like the World Economic Forum about, what everyone else is seeing in their regions, in their industries, etc. So one of the things that anybody familiar with the world of DE&I has probably clocked over recent months and weeks, probably over the last year, I would suggest, is some real questioning and in some places even rejection of DE&I agendas and initiatives. I think that's been particularly prevalent in the States. Can you fill people in on what's been going on in case people aren't aware of some of the nuances around that?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. So, particularly in the United States, it's become almost like a politicized weapon used by some bad actors to really stoke fear and division. The intent, when you think about the cornerstones of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's respect, it's civility, it's understanding, creating a sense of belonging and inclusivity. It's about being a more fair and equitable society and workplace. So, I don't know how you turn something that is intended for good into something bad. And I think that It's a lot of it's, due to a lot of misinformation. It's a lot of it's due to, um, you know, tapping into people's fears.
Mm.
I think that's where you're seeing it. And then in the United States, it's become a very political topic. There are very targeted groups that are suing organizations, suing businesses, costing, you know, millions of dollars of for frivolous lawsuits that don't have any basis or merit over removing. We've seen it removed from some publicly funded universities in one state. We've seen a lot of these DEI professionals lose their jobs and their livelihoods over something that's become politically motivated.
Yeah, and that's because the people that are bringing those suits are, as I understand it, claiming that the diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas and initiatives are actually disadvantaging certain groups. Is that right? Or is that reducing it down a bit too
That's the
simplistically?
basis of it. Many critics are saying that, that's one reason. I think it's happening for several reasons, Helen. If I may give you a few my thoughts
Yeah.
on why it's happening. I think one is change. The world is becoming more global, more diverse, and we are seeing in our individual communities this greater access and connectivity than we've ever seen in history of humanity. But there's also cultural resistance to people. People are uncomfortable with change. People want to see things that, stay the same. That's one way. I think the other thing, another reason is ideological differences and misinformation, like I mentioned before. People follow blindly charismatic leaders. They don't ask questions. They don't have independent thinking about it. They don't research their own information to get educated. And so that they kind of stoke division and fear, and they prey on individuals' lack of understanding of what really DEI does. So I think when you're praying, if you're the predator in this situation, you could twist and make people, well, um, it's about immigrants or it's about this or it's whatever the topic,
Mm.
hot topic is of the day. They can just tie it to DNI and make it the cause of something happening. And the third thing I think is it's meritocracy. Some of the harshest critics of DNI are stating that it undermines meritocracy. Um, I just feel like, those of us who are working in this field, in this area, know that there's such a thing as a meritocracy myth. There are so many things that go into it. I used to think that when I was younger. If I just work hard, if I just be my best I could be, I can achieve anything. Well, hard work alone does not necessarily lead to equal opportunities. And you have to make sure you have to understand there's conscious and unconscious biases in hiring and promotion of individuals and in evaluation, performance reviews and evaluations. People that are in marginalized groups are disproportionately affected, a lot of times in this,
Mm.
blocked from, opportunities. There are inherited advantages and disadvantages. I use this example, Helen. If you came from a billionaire family, you have the best connections, the best political know-how, you have the best education versus someone that's a son and daughter of a farmer or someone who's in a small village somewhere. So there's advantages and disadvantages that people have just by nature of who they were born, what family they were born into, what country they were born into. There's countries where women can't get an education still.
Mm.
That we have an advantage by being able to get an education living in free countries. So there's so many other things. So if you look at all those things together, then meritocracy can't, by the true definition of meritocracy, it cannot exist because it doesn't take into effect the biases,
Mm.
marginalized groups, the disproportionately disadvantaged people, and then people that are excluded, just purposely excluded from, and systemically excluded in society.
Yeah, that's a really, really brilliant summary of kind of why DE&I is needed and why it's not a level playing field. And I'm curious to know what you hear from people either in your organization or outside, like employees generally, who are obviously, I imagine, aware of this pushback against DEI. I mean, what's the response from people in everyday jobs and work lives, particularly those in minority from minority backgrounds or in minority numbers in their organizations, how are they feeling about these recent developments?
I think there's a lot of different feelings and emotions around it. I think first is outrage. It's thinking of how do you take something that's intended to be creating a level playing field for people and make it something negative. I think there's also fear because if this is how we are progressing as a society, then what does that mean for people that are considered othered or different?
Mm,
What does that mean for them? Like how will you be able to support your family in the future if you can be excluded because you're a woman, or you can be excluded because you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, or whatever how you identify. I mean, that's a huge concern and fear. I think also the other thing is I believe there's power in unity. I think that people are coming together around and galvanizing, hey, we're going to continue fighting the good fight. We're going to continue believing that, we at the basis, we are all humans. Our common bond is our humanity. If we can't
mm,
tap into that with empathy, then what is left of our society? What is left of our world and workplaces? So that's to me is the rallying cry of everybody that's impacted by this pushback. We
mm.
have to believe that deep down somewhere you will remember your humanity and act in civility as you can.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, and it's almost like the silver lining against this big pushback or rejection, isn't it? Is that it's a galvanizing force as well. But I think what you say about people really reflecting deeply on, if this is happening, what does that mean for our society? What does it mean for
Mhm.
the world, the kids that my children are going to grow up in, or the next generation? Is this a place that feels home to me, where I feel like I belong as much as anyone? It raises some really deep questions. I think what you've just been describing is, as I understand it, quite particular to the US in terms of the cases, the legal cases, etc. I would say that in the UK, as far as I'm aware, that's not really been happening in the same way. But we have a very different, well, no less kind of troubling set of challenges, which I think in part is about just a general fatigue about anything labeled diversity, equity, and inclusion related. People, a lot of people, and even in the media, articles saying, "Oh, it's all done. We're there. We're past that." And clearly, all the statistics say, "No, we're nowhere near an equal, just, and balanced world of work or society." But I think there's also other challenges about how majority um, demographics at work are finding it a challenge for themselves to continue to thrive. So I think classically here that would be men, white, older men, feeling that the world of work is quite an uncertain place now in a way it wasn't for them, 10 years ago maybe, and wondering if and many saying, I feel like I'm at a disadvantage now. I'm curious to know um, what clients are saying around this. What do you see from a client perspective? Normally, clients would ask quite a lot of information about from suppliers and partners, wouldn't they, about your diversity composition, and
Yeah.
want to see diverse pitches and
Mhm.
teams. What are they still asking about these things?
Thank you, Helen. Absolutely. I think that most companies want to demonstrate that they're inclusive, especially when we're talking about talent scarcity. We have a war for talent and we're trying to find the best of the best in our organizations to work for us. I think also from the perspective of there's greater public awareness and demands for change in the
Mm,
sense of than we've ever seen in years past. And if you think about this, if you're a for-profit organization, you have to look at your employees as these could be potential consumers of your goods and services. They could potentially refer you, or they can potentially say negative things about you. And then social media, with the rise of social media, AI, and technology, things can happen instantly. From the moment you and I are having this conversation, Helen, someone could say, I'm going to post about this on YouTube, in whatever any type of social media, platform, and have an opinion about it. And they feel very confident in that opinion. So I think that public awareness and the nature of how things are so fluid and so close. We may be global, but we're becoming very much a global one society because we
Mm.
have access through technology to information that we didn't have 30 years ago or 40 years ago or however many years ago. I think one thing I would say for me as not only just a DEI practitioner, but as a consumer, I'm very conscientious about what brands and goods I support. Because if someone is coming out and saying to me, I don't want to see a woman, or I don't want to see a minority, I don't want to see a disabled person, a veteran, however someone identifies using their products, I feel like I can take my hard earned money and spend it elsewhere.
Mm.
And I may not publicly boycott, I will personally boycott in the sense of I will refuse to purchase any goods and services there. I don't need to shop there. There's always a competitor that you can go to for your goods and services. So I
Yeah.
think people should be mindful of that, companies, because you're not the only person in the market. There's always a competitor, at your coattails. And if you're not inclusive, if you're not evolving, then you're not reflective of the society and your customer base, that you're selling to.
Yes, I think that's such a great point. And what I was reminding or trying to explain to my 12-year-old daughter fairly recently is that the pennies in her pocket money and in her purse represent power that she has to influence things in the world. It might be a very small action, but if everybody uses their spending power in that way, that can add up to really significant changes. So you're right, we have like democratic powers if we're fortunate enough to live in a democracy, but we also have our economic power in terms of who we spend our money on, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, and do you feel and hear that business leaders generally still believe or are convinced by the value to the business and to shareholders and customers of having a very diverse, equitable organization? Or I mean, what's the best way to add value if you're in a DE&I function to prove the value of what you do to the business against this backdrop of debate and pushback?
I think the best way is being embedded in the business. I think when you are integral to working within the business and be a true partner to the business, I think that's the best way. I'll use this example. Um, a leader will say, I don't have time to worry about, diversity or equity inclusion. Just say, okay, well, what about the cost of how much did you lose last year in turnover cost? How much did it cost you in turnover costs? You can tie that to when you have greater inclusion, when a person can show up and work and be their best authentic selves and they feel like they belong, you're going to have less turnover, and that's going to save you money there in your business line. Innovation. If you think about DE&I, one of the big business cases for it is innovation. Diverse perspectives brings diverse ideas, innovative solutions, and problem solving. So I think that that's another thing. Innovation can make you ahead of your competitors or at pace with your competitors in a market. The other one is measurement. I think we have to be able to measure the impact. Some things are, subjective, I get that, but there's tangible measurements you can look at. We talk about the cost of retention versus turnover. We could talk about the cost of even the cost of hiring someone. Wouldn't it be nice if you could say that, hey, I have a diverse talent pool that I've developed, and I don't have to go outside the organization to find that person because they are committed to staying here because they feel seen, valued, and heard. So there are so many things that I think you can tie it to,
Mm,
and I think you have to measure it and effectively communicate it back to the business to remind them that yes, we're here for the business.
mm.
Without people, you don't have a business. Without, having the right people, you don't have a successful business. And I think that's where DE&I plays a huge role. And it's just explaining it to the business leader and stakeholder.
Yeah, and really painting the business consequences that play out if you do X, Y, Z, and have a really thriving DE&I strategy. Yeah, I really like that. It's super concrete and it's in
Yeah.
language that they get, and it sells it really, effectively, doesn't it?
It does. And I would say for our team, we're in the business of talent. So our team, DE&I, I don't know any other company that has DEI leaders who are also client facing.
Mm.
My entire team is client facing. We do peer-to-peer conversations. We do DEI consultancy work, which impacts revenue for our company. We do quarterly business reviews with clients to talk about what's happening internally around DEI and best practice sharing. There's always things that we are able to tie it back to a client and a leader. And I think that's how we add value, to the business, is by being visible to the clients.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I imagine, in most other industries, the DE&I team and resources are quite inwardly focused. I mean, outward in
Correct.
terms of who we might attract to the organization, but generally their focus is on the organization itself. It's fascinating that you look both ways. You are supporting and hearing from clients around DE&I, and you are supporting your own organization on that. So there must be a lot of richness, I can imagine, that comes from those external conversations, and quite a lot of cross fertilization, I guess, of learning.
I think it's a definitely a benefit to the business because I really believe that the more we're connected to to the customers, to the clients, to the people. I mean, people are is really the connective tissue through all businesses, no matter what you do. And I think that the more that you are aligned there, the greater the impact, the greater the conversation, the greater of understanding. Clients want to know that you understand that you're on the same journey they're on.
Mm.
They don't want you to come out with a cookie cutter solution. They want to know that you can uniquely customize something for them to help solve their particular item or challenge that they have. And I think that's where the value is. It lies in that custom solution.
Yeah, and so for someone that's in an industry that's not about talent, that may be just the single lead resource on D&I, and they don't have a team, there's nothing presumably to stop them from, or it might be beneficial to just say, right, I'm coming out to meet clients with you. I'm coming out to talk to them about their needs, and still do that external facing stuff to help, I guess, strengthen the conversations they have within the business.
I think they would start if it was somebody just working in a regular, making widgets or something, a company. I would say start with the business leaders to find out, hey, what are some of your pain points, and then find a DE&I related solution to help with that pain point. That's
Mm.
where they see the value when you have a solution that can help. I think that's the piece of it, and then the customer piece. If they have a peer that's in that customer, that's another great avenue to add value to say, hey, I am on the WEF DE&I community of practice with, XYZ company. I think, I would be great if we could have a conversation to see how our solution or our service or products can support them in their needs. And you might have some competitive information that your business leader would never ever hear because they're not talking to the same people you're talking
Mm.
to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And so, looking ahead now, what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on how DE and I is going to keep evolving as uh, something on hopefully all good business leaders' agenda, but also as a kind of function and as a resource? Is it going to look, if we were talking 5 years, 10 years from now, hopefully we will get to do that over a cuppa, what would you be saying around, wow, we've seen this? What's your best prediction?
Oh, wow. I could give you my wish list of what I would love to see,
Yeah,
Helen.
go
I
for it.
think I would say, well, one, I would love to see global standards on DE&I. I think that there is no globalization. I think that that would be nice to have some bare bare minimum understanding of the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that would
Mm,
be interesting. Enhanced transparency and accountability. We're seeing some of that now with ESG reporting requirements. I think we're going to see more transparency and public reporting from companies on organizations being held accountable to real commitments, not just putting it on paper, but actually doing something. I would say also, I believe, Helen, I think it's looking at more personalized, things. I mean, because before COVID, we never talked about mental health and well-being. And that should just be something that's standard now, not some taboo topic. I think looking at things that we would think considered personal before, and making that more integrated into business so that you can feel that you can bring your true whole self, into an organization and work. I think cross-cultural learnings is important. I think that's really critical. Like you said, there's things, different countries are dealing with different things. And I think
Mm.
understanding that and having that as a standard in organizations would be critical for success of DE&I. And then I would say technology. We're in the age of AI and rapid, AI development. What's the ethical and inclusive use of AI? You know, that how do we integrate that with DE&I and the ethical inclusive use of AI? We're
Mm.
going to see more and more AI, as time progresses. And then is there going to be inclusive AI teams, to make sure that is taken into account as they're building out and evolving the technology?
Yeah, fascinating. So much there. I think we could have a whole conversation about all those five things. I love the global standards in D&I because that does seem to be still quite disparate, and just around the whole professionalization of DE&I as a profession. Are there global standards, accreditations? Like my understanding, it's a little bit more still kind of region specific or country specific around that. And on the enhanced transparency and accountability and public reporting, I can see signs in the UK that that's where we're heading. Until very recently, the financial regulators were about to well, they had been consulting, as you know, on much greater data collection and reporting around diversity inclusion in financial services, and they've just pulled back from that a bit. I think mainly because they realise it's quite a big thing to bite off, and it needs a bit more further thought to work well. But really interesting, and also about your point about tech and AI and how that influences diversity and inclusion. Even I've been getting a little bit more interested in that lately, and even just understanding that a lot of kind of generative AI tools are designed primarily by men, and might not therefore take into account kind of you know I don't know, female approaches to subjects, or
Mhm.
how women might use the tools, etc. So if we're not careful, the kind of the gender balanced perspective on that might be, what's the word, accidentally designed out. So
Yeah.
really fascinating. And do you think we'll continue to see the same kind of structure and roles around DE&I within organizations as we've seen to date, or do you think how D&I gets resourced in an organization might change as well?
I think it's how it's the resource is going to change, definitely. I don't anticipate that it's going to be too different than how we have it today. But, I think about, for example, Helen, I'm in a global role. So we have to take into consideration kind of a global local approach because we
Mm.
have to take into the cultural nuances of the region, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and how far people are along their DEI journey and the maturity level, are they ready, or the readiness of it. So I think that's important to look at. So again, I don't know if organizations will call it something different in the future. They may change and evolve the title. I think the principles will remain the same, which again is that respectfulness, that sense of belonging, that inclusivity, and creating fairness,
Yeah.
and transparency around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's back to those cornerstones that you mentioned right at
Yeah.
the start of our conversation, which I thought was a wonderful way of framing it, and wonderful things to hold on to and remember about what is really what we're talking about here, what really matters at the heart of it. Thank you so much, Audra, for sharing your very expert views and wisdom on this big topic, and helping us understand how DE&I is evolving and where it might be heading in the future. It's been absolutely fascinating to listen and debate that with you. If people listening want to follow your work or connect with you professionally or find out more about what Randstad do, what's the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. So at Randstad, our website is randstad.com. On LinkedIn, I am just Audra Jenkins. And on Twitter, I'm the Audra Jenkins. And then, of course, check out our Diversity Deep Dive podcast, wherever podcasts are streamed.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll pop links to all of those things in the show notes, so people just have a quick look at the show notes, one click, and you'll get connected and find what you need. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, Audra. I feel better informed, obviously, about where D&I is going, and it's been great to explore all of that with you. Thank you so much for being a brilliant guest.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen, for your time.